Hey, everybody, and welcome back to another episode of Indie Game Movement, the podcast that talks about the marketing and business of indie games. I'm Andrew Pappas, and I'll actually be your guest today in episode 116, and we're going to be talking about how indie devs can use paid advertising. All right, so some context here. Recently, I was asked to be part of the Business of Indie Games Virtual Summit, which features well-known and established devs, industry veterans, marketers, and many more who are talking about the business of indie games. So this thing is absolutely loaded with a ton of value, and I'm very grateful that they had me as a guest, along with so many other great people that are willing to help out the indie dev community. One of which I can recall off the top of my head is Tanya X Short of KitFox Games. She was actually featured in episode 107 of the podcast. So that just gives you another idea of the type of people that are going to be part of this awesome summit. So this episode in particular is the full recording of my interview with them, where I go into strategies and techniques that you can use for paid advertising. Now, with that said, if this episode was helpful and provided a great value to you, please check out their website, businessofindiegames.com, because there's a ton more content where that came from. Now, the summit is scheduled to go live December 9th through the 13th. And if you decide to sign up, make sure to use the exclusive coupon code they provided just for Indie Game Movement listeners, which gives you 20% off full access to all the interviews. It's the best deal that you're going to get anywhere else. So if you don't mind, pause the episode and then go to businessofindiegames.com, check out the site, and if you sign up, use the coupon code, which is IGM, to get that 20% off. Now, full disclaimer, I don't get any commission or anything for this. I'm really just grateful that they had me as a guest for this event and that they are willing to provide such an exclusive offer to all of you guys. So make sure to check out the site, relax as we talk about how indie devs can use paid advertising right here on Indie Game Movement.
We're here to debunk some of the myths about paid advertising today. And I'm so glad to have you with us today, Andrew.
Yeah, same here, and really appreciate you guys having me be a part of this. It's great to help out the community.
Fantastic. Lovely. So let's dive straight in.
Sure.
Please tell us a little bit about how you got into games and what brought you to start RenGen.
Yeah, so growing up as a kid in the early 80s, I forgot exactly what system, but I got an Atari and then slowly got other consoles, a lot, but Nintendo, PlayStation specifically. And just growing up as a kid, it was just a very, awesome experience for me. Just loved playing games. I mean, that's kind of like everybody's story, right? But then as I got older, I realized that, you have less time for things, and gaming was one of them, unfortunately. And as I, through this, I also started a career through marketing and really started focusing on that more. But then as I was developing my career further, I still always had a passion for games and playing different game types. And honestly, I wanted to do more with the community than just be a player. And then I suddenly one day realized that, hey, I could do marketing and still help out games, and particularly indie devs and indie games as a whole, because I think they are very underrepresented in a lot of ways. I mean, they've come a long way since, our more traditional AAA titles from back in the day. But I realized that those things came together. They went together very well. And ever since then, that's pretty much how RenGen was born, out of just sheer passion in terms of playing games, but wanting to be more with the community and helping out with the community.
Yeah, thank you. And so what is it you're actually doing for devs now? Cover the whole range of marketing?
Yeah, there's a whole range of different things. In particular, to sum it up, it's consulting and some managed services. So consulting is a big part of it, but also more specifically managed services. So that's everything from organic efforts and paid advertising and other things that kind of fall under those two buckets.
And do you get involved in the PR side of things?
To some extent, that's not necessarily an area that I really focus on or specialize in. Though I do understand that it's important, and I do know of, what strategies can be implemented and everything. But right now, that's not a main focus for me.
And would you say that you focused more on the organic strategy of marketing or on the paid advertising stuff? Your particular expertise is for the paid stuff, right?
Correct. Yep. I would say from a managed services standpoint, it would be both of those. But I definitely have a lot of expertise in the paid side of things. I've been doing that for probably about 6-7+ years.
Oh, great. That's awesome. Because, I've had it myself. And, people say that it doesn't work. And then there's people that rely on it. And then there are other people who say once you set it up and you get a system, you can just crank it up,
right?
And it's like a turnkey. So what are the myths, and what works and what doesn't?
Yeah, no, it's a great question. And in terms of myths, or at least people calling out to saying oh, paid advertising doesn't work. I mean, because I've seen it numerous times or have heard about it and everything. And honestly, I think it comes down to one main thing, which is, people's expectations. Not only that, but paid advertising platforms as a whole can be pretty cumbersome and require a lot of skill sets and knowledge behind those platforms to use. So at face value, the concept of them is pretty simple. I pay money and I get end result, whether that's a click to my site, downloading my game, signing up for my email list. Pretty straightforward. But what I think a lot of people miss on that, and it's nothing against them, because let's face it, devs are focused on making their game. So they don't necessarily have the mental bandwidth to allocate towards, marketing, especially with paid advertising in those channels. So they go in with this idea that if I pay money, I will get this end result, but they might not know of what types of levers or triggers to push. They might not know of certain ad types to use. So they're just kind of trying a little bit of everything without knowing what might be the best direction based off of their desired objectives or goals. And then from those efforts, if they're not necessarily doing it with the right plan or mind, obviously the right intentions, but might not have the right understanding of what to do, then it easily becomes a thing where, or at least an experience where what they ended up getting was not what they expected. Thus, and a lot of times the discussion comes about of paid advertising doesn't work. But in the moments that it does work, as you said, it comes down through a process of gathering data, understanding what that data is, making decisions backed by that information, and then optimizing campaigns further to a point where it becomes essentially scalable, and then kind of turning up the crank, so to speak, putting more money at it, and then getting that return on investment. But to summarize it, I would say the biggest myth I think out there is to say, or people saying that it doesn't work, where, it definitely can work. And it's just a matter of having that understanding behind it.
I mean, that's great. It's really encouraging, actually, that it can work.
Oh, yeah.
So if I have a great product, which I think is the first thing that you need.
Mm-hmm, definitely.
And I've built up, let's say I've released the prototype and I've released a few trailers on YouTube. I've maybe had some influencer coverage, and I have a Discord group, and I've got a bit of a community.
Okay.
Say a couple of thousand folk. What are the successful strategies then? What would I do with that in terms of paid advertising?
Well, there's a few things that you can do. So you're already getting a lot of a different engagement on different levels. So with that in mind, you can let's establish some channels first. And most of these are what I'm talking about after this is pretty common with all these channels. So let's say you have Google, right? And the main ones I would focus on for Google would be Google Display, and part of the display network is YouTube, but we'll just call it YouTube. And then another would be Facebook. So I would have those channels in place. So as you mentioned, you have all these other assets, let's call them, where people are going to your Discord, they're going to your website, they're engaging with your item, with your game on various levels. Well, what you can do, the biggest one I would do, especially if you already have this type of engagement, chances are you're probably getting some good web traffic too. People might be going to specific landing pages if you have a lot of them, or they're just, checking out your homepage for updates and things. Well, with paid advertising on all these channels I just mentioned, you can create an audience pool. So what that does is basically people visit your site and you can say, hey, anybody who visits my site, I want to collect just their, basic information. Basically, it just puts a cookie on that user, and then you can use that audience that you just created. It's like a custom audience you created, and then you can re-engage with those individuals. And the reason why that's really important to consider and do, especially if you have an audience like that, is because, let's face it, everybody, whether it's us or players, is busy. And having that audience created is going to allow you to re-engage with them and remind them of your product. And that strategy can be very layered too. It could just be a matter of, hey, this is the game. It's like a little reminder about your game, right? Or let's say you have people in an email list which haven't purchased that game yet. And then you can go ahead and just remind them to purchase the game if you're already released out. Or if you're not, just basically what that does is the remarketing allows you to set up a funnel to re-engage with people and driving them closer to the main action you want them to take, whether it's signing up for your email list or to, purchase your game. And that's, I would say, when you have an audience like that, one of the main things you'd want to be doing, because there's a good chance that they might not necessarily, follow through. And I think it's one of the best ways you can re-engage with those users, especially for anybody who isn't very active to committing or might have that difficulty remembering your game. Because even if you have all these channels available and people are engaging, it doesn't necessarily mean that every single one of them is highly active on all those channels. So you want to properly make sure that you have another way to kind of capture all those users appropriately.
Yeah, thank you. That's very thorough and very interesting. Do you have some specific examples of that you could share with us, please?
Let's see. So a specific example in terms of like what a remarketing funnel might look like, or?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, thank you.
Yeah, sure. So one would be, let's say you have, just for the sake of example, you have a landing page that talks about, so not when I say landing page, it's not just your main website. It's a page dedicated to, let's say whether you have, let's say you have your game is going to release on, Switch and PlayStation or Steam, right? And specifically where I'm talking about like multiple consoles. So you have a landing page dedicated to those consoles that your game is going to be offered on. So what you can do, especially if you have the volume to back it, because if you don't have a lot of volume, it makes a strategy a little bit more difficult. But if you have a good enough volume where people are going to your site and clicking on a link to either of those destinations, whether it's like Switch or Steam, you can actually track the people that are clicking on those outbound links and set them up as an audience. So what that does for the funnel, and this is probably about maybe I would say mid to lower range, if they're clicking on that, what I would do is essentially take those audiences from where they're going, and then you can use a remarketing ad to say, hey, look, and tailor the copies specifically to the people who are clicking on the Switch link. Or you could do the same thing but to Steam. So that way it makes your ad resonate with them a lot better. It's not just a generic ad, but you can really hone in and focus on that particular user, reminding them. So that would be like one specific example.